All right, I'll try to go through this relatively quickly. We got about 45 minutes. Feel free to ask questions or anything as we go throughout. It's meant to be pretty informal. There are some handouts in the back. Our newest residential deck construction guides back there, our smoke alarm, carbon monoxide alarm affidavits back there, and our alarm affidavit policy is back there as well. So just first to go over the smoke and carbon monoxide alarm affidavit, about 4 years ago, we created a form that could be used as an affidavit for basically used in lieu of verifying smoke and carbon monoxide alarm placement in a house when it's required by code. So that was only for when we didn't need to go in the residence. So re-roofs, exterior water heaters, siding, things like that. We allowed this to be used. When I say we, it was sort of regionally did it together. From Placer, Sutter, Sierra County, about 10 to 15 different jurisdictions in this region of California decided to do that. Our affidavit that we have, this is mainly due because all the other jurisdictions couldn't agree on a single document. But in Grass Valley, Town, Truckee, Sierra County, and South Lake Tahoe, as well as Nevada County, obviously, all have the same document. So if you see that, you can use it in any of those jurisdictions. It's the exact same one. So what this is I kind of explain when it can be used, when we don't need to go in a house for something else to verify. Verification and installation. So this form requires a contractor and the homeowner to sign it. Really because that provides kind of a two-factor authentication, if you will, where you as a professional, as a contractor, will verify it because you deal with this all the time. You know a lot of the codes and things like that, as well as you're informing the homeowner and they're acknowledging the risks related to that. Because this is, even though it's the most simplistic fire life safety item in the building code, smoke and carbon monoxide alarms. It's a very easy, relatively inexpensive compared to other components of construction for fire and life safety. Already went over who is required to sign, process for inspection. So when we come out for the inspection, for like a roof, for example, we do an in progress and a final. When we come out for final, we get up on the roof, do the roof inspection. We'll have the permit card and we'll have a copy of that affidavit if they choose to use it. This is not mandatory. We can always still go in and verify those alarms, but we don't need to. We allow that option. The one thing with this that is newer, we've had some issues with this form. So we've had some abuse of it, like it happens with a lot of different things. So what is happening with certain groups and certain individuals is where they're not verifying, they're telling the homeowner to just sign it, it's not a big deal, and they're basically intentionally not putting alarms in or not trying to meet the intent of what this form is used for. So we've had some issues over that this last year, and instead of taking it away completely, because it is a benefit, I think, to a lot of people, they don't have to go inside, and trance in their house with muddy boots and everything, is there's a policy back there that states to this basically how we're going to handle it. So the first time an inspector sees that, which has happened mainly through talking to the homeowner, is they're saying, well, we had to sign this form, but we didn't know anything about it. We're not sure. Can you show us where the alarms need to be? And there's no alarms in your house. So the inspector finds out about it through a bunch of different ways, but that's primarily the main reason. So if we find out the first time, we issue a warning to that contractor, put that in writing, send it to them, basically saying how the policy, how our policy stands, the purpose of the form, and moving forward. The second time, it'll be a year ban from use from that contractor anytime they want to use it. The third violation is a lifetime ban. They can't use it anymore. We're going to keep that as part of our filing in our system for all the contractors we have. That way we don't punish everybody and take it away, but people that are abusing it are the ones that they're going to feel it and not use it. Any questions on that policy? Yeah.
Have you had homeowners be ornery as far as just letting, and we had an instance where they wanted us to sign off on it, and I knew we didn't have them in there, so we wouldn't sign off on it. And so since we've just put in all of our contracts that we won't use the form, we're not gonna do it. And we also had another instance where they were there when we looked at it, and then later on we went back and I noticed that they were gone, they'd taken them down.
Yeah.
So we don't feel that we want to put our liability on the line in order to say that it's there. And we have had problems where if we don't sign off on it, they don't want to let you guys in, then we're ultimately the one pulling the permit, can't get final.
Yeah.
We get the call a year later saying, hey, you haven't finalized that job.
So I can think of two off the top of my head are basically the homeowners won't let us in the house, and they're very, very confrontational about it. And we deal with those separately through our code compliance process and move through there. As far as the other part of it, if you guys are held liable, ultimately you're not.
Okay.
Technically, it's the property owner's responsibility to finalize permits regardless who obtains it. There's some different verbiage in contractor state law in regards to that and permits, but in the building code, it is the property owner's responsibility ultimately for all the permits pulled on that property. So most of the letters will, if you are the one that pulled the permit or you're under the contract, we'll send you a notification as well, but we also send one to the homeowner. So if you're having that issue, just reach out to us, and if it's something specific, then maybe we might send an inspector by, talk to the person, or whatever.
Is there some documentation for that I can look up as far as being ultimately the contract or the homeowner's responsibility? I'd like to include that in my contract, just that ultimately it's on them and it's all done.
Shoot me a quick email,
Okay.
and then I'll look it up and I'll send it through. On the other one that you said is, we've run into that too, to where the contractor puts them up or helps the owner put them up or gives direction, they're up when they're verified them. And then when the inspector comes out, they're down, or one of them's down, or something like that. The inspector can see that. You know, they can see the holes and where it was at, or the locations where they were at and the patch job. So they can see that. That's not the intent. We're not gonna hold the contractors responsible for that. We'll try to educate the homeowners on that. That isn't the intent. It's really basically for the pure negligence of not doing it and trying to get around the system a little bit.
I take it out if it's out.
Hey, be shocked for a lot of people we do with this. So, any more questions on that? Okay. Decks. Our primary discussion today is decks. In the county, we have tons of decks. Every day, seems like we're issuing permits for decks. Deck repairs, new decks, partial deck replacements, deck additions, all kinds of stuff. So really, when is a permit required? Is there a magic button when a permit is required for a deck? Anybody have a guess?
Always more than 30 inches off the ground and more than 200 square feet.
Okay. So I'll talk about that here in a minute. So if I replace one deck girder,
Structural.
does it require a permit? Yeah, technically, yeah. If you replace one deck girder, it requires a permit. What about two deck joists? Yeah, no. I see some, maybe.
Probably.
Or some, I
Probably.
did that yesterday, I hope not.
Probably, but maybe. Some with guilty looks.
Well, you're doing the decking too there though, right? So
That's another thing too, but, so if they were just,
compliant decking?
yeah, I mean, if they were just pulling it down from the bottom, replacing it back up and refastening it, right? Say it was dry, it was like a home sale and they needed it for their termite report. They're replacing a couple of joists. Technically, yeah. Requires a permit. What about one post?
I'm gonna say yeah.
Yeah, there you go. You guys are getting it now. Technically, yes. What about all deck surface boards? So existing substructure, obviously this is a small deck, but they're just replacing boards. What if this was even elevated? It doesn't matter. What do you guys think?
No, hopefully no. No need.
Yes,
No.
because of the roofing.
No, we don't. We don't require it. We probably could because there's no specific exemptions, but we consider this kind of in the same realm of, it's not structural. It's not really, I mean, you could argue the fact that it is to a certain extent. The code does regulate attachment of this, so you could argue that fact, but for us, and I think most jurisdictions, we don't require permits for this.
Unless you remove the rail.
Can you even build it like that, right on the ground like that?
So if this is all pressure treated and you had the little pier footings in here, sure, but not like this. I mean, this isn't a picture from the ground.
The dirt looks like it's about
No,
an
no,
inch
no.
from the deck.
Yeah.
It's,
So there's a, Alta Sierra, there's a few places there, actually, there's a bunch of decks like this, but they have like piers, you just can't see them, they're basically, and they use all pressure treated material. So, go ahead.
What if the old material was allowed to be on a 24-inch span and the new has to be on a 12 or 16-inch span?
So I'll get into that here shortly, a little bit later. So, but as far as permit requirements, pretty much anything structural, guardrails, stairs, stringers, anything like that you could equate to structural or life safety requires a permit. If all else fails, just say, yeah, it requires a permit and ask the question. It's easy to call us or text or email us and see if, you know, I have this specific situation, does it require a permit? I'd rather that than one of the inspectors drive by and be like, oh man, Josh, you know, you got half this permit, this deck ripped off, you need a permit, sort of thing. So in general, almost everything that's involved with the decks or additions, alterations, or new requires a permit except decking or trim. You know, you say you have decorative trim somewhere or whatever else. So what Mark was saying is there are some exemptions. I put a hint up here because, what did you say, Mark, for the exemption?
Less than 30 inches above the ground, less than 200 square feet.
Less than 200 square feet.
They also not attached to the building.
And not attached. So detached, less than 200 square feet, closer than 30 inches to the ground. So like this one would be exempt. So mainly because the 30 inches requirement is the requirement for guardrails, so you need guardrails for that. There's not really much risk there. We do the same thing for docks. So like docks at lakes and things like that, like wildwood or regular pines. We have the same exemption. We tell people you build a dock that's less than 200 square feet, we exempt it. Any questions on that? All right. So we have an updated residential deck construction guide. For the most part, this guide's been around for a while, and it was even in before my time. We just modified it over the years. We modified it this last time to make it more consistent with the current building codes and residential codes. So we used to require engineering if you're over 10 feet above the ground or you're over a 40-pound snow load. The newest code cycle, the 2016 cycle that came in a couple of years ago, allowed a 14-foot max conventional design post height. So we changed that guide to allow, if you want to design a deck conventionally, it's 12 foot or 13 foot in height, you can do it now, we wouldn't let you do it before. So we changed that conventional designs with 14 max post heights. We put a lot of emphasis of pressure treated wood requirements in there because we've run into that more than we should. When an inspector comes out and they have a 1,000 square foot deck and everything's framed and dug for and all requires pressure treated, that's a difficult call to make in the field and break the news to somebody. So we've really tried to emphasize that and really highlight those requirements. Some revisions to details for conventional allowances, so connections, positive post-immune connections, blocking, things like that. Clarification on diagonal bracing requirements, so posts, lateral and diagonal bracing requirements, and lateral load connection requirements, so really the connections to the house. I have some details later on for that. See some Simpson guys in here, so you know. One thing I will say too, if you guys don't know, I'll put a plug for you guys. You guys have a newer connector catalog out, right?
Yeah.
That just got released.
Yeah.
So if you haven't got that yet, I think you can put an order in.
It's online,
right?
order online.
Yeah.
I've got some in my car if you want to use it afterwards.
So yeah, we just got some in the mail. I expect a kickback, you know, maybe
Yeah.
some free hangers or something later.
McDonald's?
So when is engineering required? So when post heights are over 14 feet, that changed from, it used to be overall deck height, so from ground to surface of the deck was 10 feet. We required it now, we're saying post heights over 14 feet. Because there's
So are you going off the ground for that post height? What if you have sonotubes, piers that are 3 feet off the ground?
So if you want to use something like you want to supplement, most likely if you're using the sonotube piers that have that much, that's going to have to be an engineered system anyway.
Yeah.
So it's going to be trigger it automatically.
Okay.
But, I mean, if you're, let's see if this pen works. Basically what it is, if you have a deck that's going away, and that's your beam, this is your post, this is your footing, it's from here, it's actual post height. That makes sense. So,
Sometimes push the piers so you can get standard lumber lengths.
yeah, it just depends on if you can do that conventionally, because there's different limitations for stem wall heights and things like that. So typically, if we were to see like a 3 foot wide or tall sonnet, that's going to be an engineer method. Snow loads greater than 40 pounds per square foot. Why is that? Anybody know? Yeah, I was going to bring some hats too and give those away if you guys got some things with it. Because lateral?
Brace, yeah.
Okay.
Braces lateral.
Okay. So that's part of it. But in the simplest terms, that's all the span tables in the residential code go up to is 40 pound snow load. Anything over that, there's no tables to use.
Is that ground snow load or flat roof
It's ground
snow
snow
load?
load. Yeah,
So
it's
we
not.
don't go by ground snow loads?
It's ground snow load. So roofing is different. So this is just for deck members, flat deck members, is 40 pounds max. Roofing conventionally can go up to 70. And that's ground snow load, that's not reduced. So engineering is totally different because you guys get to use your reduction factors for heated buildings and exposure and all the other stuff. Conventional, just talking about conventional only. And really just non-conventional designs, kind of like the footings you were talking about, where you have steel decking, or you have something really weird material-wise you want to use that you can't use conventionally. But for the most part, it's the height or the ground snow load. I mean, essentially, if you're, hang on a second, Josh. Essentially, if you're over above Grass Valley or even above the bottom part of Grass Valley, it's going to be over 40 pounds.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah, so essentially, almost everything, I think, everything with the exception of some parcels around the Kmart area in Grass Valley is over 40 pounds. So, yeah.
So maybe I asked the question incorrectly. Do you design a deck for the ground snow load or flat roof snow load?
So, I see what you're asking now. So technically it's a flat roof snow load if you're designing it based on engineering practices. So, but it's still, the requirement is based on ground snow load.
Because some counties are requiring ground snow load for the deck design. So
A lot of times if it's close, it's not gonna matter because you're still gonna have to use the 1.5 safety factor nowadays, which I'll talk about here a little later. What does this include? So vertical loading, obviously, of all your structural members. So girders, stringers, posts, joists, ledgers, everything, right? All the way down to the footings. Lateral analysis, so bracing lateral load connections, the footings I mentioned, ledger attachment, specific structural connections. So if you have something really weird or the cantilever or something like that. That 1.5 safety factor a couple of years ago, after they had those balcony collapses in Berkeley, they did an emergency errata in the building code and said if you're structurally engineering a deck, and that's based on the building code, you have to use that 1.5 safety factor. So what's the live load typically of a deck, John?
well, the 40 times 1.5 going up to 60.
So typically it's 40, and the safety, with the safety factor in there, automatically bumped it up 20 pounds. So a lot of times that increased member sizes just because of this requirement. So, and just dead and live loading, obviously. So people loads and snow loads and all the material loads.
Okay.
Yeah.
What that changed a lot is when you're replacing a deck, now the load is 1.5 times as much as it was on each footing.
Yes.
Which makes it hard to reuse footings, rebuild the deck. So that's been a big problem, you know, because every deck only lasts 10 to 20 years, and now the footings are no good.
They almost always nowadays have to replace footings for the most part. And I'll talk about that because that's one of the things that we're seeing a lot of that can be a challenge. So just some, I shouldn't have put mistakes on here, but just plan review things that we see all the time when we're doing plan review. For most decks, we do those over the counter, unless it's something really complicated, like a steel deck or there's a really high snow load. For the most part, we issue those over the counter. No lateral analysis included with the engineering. So you have 14-foot tall posts, there's no bracing or anything, but there's also no analysis on the lateral loading of that. So we see that, we may have engineering for everything else, but they don't have lateral. No lateral load devices shown. So lateral load devices shown, meaning, if I say lateral load device, what do I mean? And this is relatively new to the last code cycles.
Like a deck tension tie.
Like a deck tension tie. So like these things are the DTT2Zs. Yeah, I'm giving you guys all kinds of problems today. Man, I didn't plan this out or anything. So this is a deck tension tie. So a couple code cycles ago, they added this requirement into the code for decks. So basically it tied these structures together, I guess more closely you could say. So basically we would get this plan that has this construction of everything for the deck, everything's good, but they don't show the locations of these required devices. So typically if you're using one of these, you would put one on each end of the deck. I'll talk about the onesies here shortly, which is a little bit different. Oh, actually this is a picture of it. So this is a onesie. For a lot of deck rebuilds, this is what we're seeing primarily, so I don't have to dig into the existing structure. It's good that these are out there because it's way easier. The only thing is you have to increase the amount of double essentially. So instead of one here and one here, you have one here, 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 and here, evenly spaced across the deck. And the code is very specific on the allowances of these. So most of the time we redline this. We just tell them, hey, you need to include these. We have a standard detail, we'll include your packet, and we'll redline them. Lack of details. So I say this, but it doesn't necessarily you have to have a ton of details either, as long as you have good notes and good plans as you go through. Because you might just say, instead of showing pressure treated materials, you're going to say all structural members pressure treated. Or instead of having, you know, this detail, you have a note that points to the section and says 4x4 brace at 45-degree angle with such and such lag bolt connection in each one. That's just as good as the detail. But a lot of times it's either the lack of the notes or details on the plans. So, you know, post to beam connections, those braces at posts, guardrail connection details, and stairs. The funny thing about this is we have all of this for you, for the most part, in our deck construction guide. You can pull whatever from that, you can rip pages out and staple it to it. We do it ourselves. So it's a lot of this is for you. And there's a lot of details online too you can use.
Question about the, actually a couple slides back, we talked about the lateral analysis on
Yeah.
deck. So do you accept just the engineered deck, just the prescriptive knee braces that they call for there, or are you talking about an actual lateral analysis for the deck?
So if you want to do anything other than the prescriptive, essentially, so if you don't want to do those braces on every post all the way around, then you'll give us the analysis. So a lot of times people don't want them for decorative reasons, or they're in a sight line or something, so they want to do away with a few. That's when you run the analysis.
I think this only allows the knee braces at the ends, not in the center.
So if you look at the revised one, that's something we clarified. It's every post.
Oh, that is.
Yeah, that's the original design. So thank you for clarifying. Pressure treated materials. So I can't remember exactly what the code says, but it basically says in geographical areas where essentially dry rot is prevalent, and where because of the moisture and the climate and everything else, you have to have pressure treated materials when exposed to the weather. So what that means is pretty much everything in the county we require and have interpreted that, and I would say it's pretty consistent in the region, that if it's exposed to the weather, it has to be pressure treated. There's an exception to that I'm not in necessarily full agreement, but this was sort of this way before my time, is in Truckee. So the Truckee region and Tahoe region, the Engineers Association up there did a huge, long scientific study back 5-10 years ago about dry rot and damage, and they came to the conclusion after they had a bunch of biologists involved, I think they even had a physicist. I mean, it was a pretty intense study they did, that it, based on their climate, because it's really dry, it isn't subject to the same requirements, so they don't have to do pressure treating. That is for a couple of reasons, mainly for structural factors, because the pressure treated material has less structural value. That was one of the main reasons, plus the looks and feel of it. So up in Truckee and the Tahoe region up in there, we allow it not to be pressure treated. So if you're doing work up there, just be acknowledged of that. And that's, Truckee allows that, Placer allows that up in that area, South Lake does, and we're all consistent about that. So when I say exposed to the weather, what does that mean? So if I have a deck over this, and I have a cover, essentially going up and over this area. Rain can still kind of get in this way. Is that considered exposed to the weather?
Yes.
Anybody else?
Isn't it if you're squared up to the roof with the angle, just like when they're checking for GFIs to use weatherproofing? Is it the same rule?
So jurisdictions interpret this differently. Everywhere I've worked, we've interpreted it differently for whatever reason. We do drip line. So if it's underneath the drip line, we consider it not exposed to the weather. Mainly for the most part, it's not going to be exposed to the weather except for storms and a few storms and things like that throughout the year. But enforcement, it's easy to enforce it that way and communicate that requirement. That's the main reason we do it. So if it's under a covered area drip line, then it doesn't need to be pressure treated.
Dry most of the time.
Yeah, exactly.
So open that picture, that whole area under there wouldn't have to be pressure treated.
So like this one, for example, this
Yeah.
whole deck wouldn't have to be pressure treated. We even treat this for posts, even though, like I said, I guess we gotta pick our battles when we get them. With this, our policy was the deck, everything underneath this drip line wouldn't be required, but the stringers and all this stuff, all the structural stuff are under here would have to be, because it's exposed.
So Craig, what about, if it's an upper deck and the posts go through to support the upper deck?
Yeah.
That if it was pressure treated, it'd become part of a rail system down below, it would look pretty crappy. That
Hard to
way.
make
So
look good.
it could go to a Doug fir, even though there's not a drip line.
So if it's exposed to the weather, because essentially, say this was a 2-story deck and this was a deck up
And
here.
there wasn't a roof up above it.
If there wasn't a roof and the weather could come through, it's still exposed to the deck. It's
So you'd have the pressure treated rail posts
Yeah.
that look pretty damn bad.
Yeah, it's,
How about if they're painted and treated that way? It still doesn't
No.
work.
no, the only time, what we tell people is materials, you can choose materials, redwoods and cedars, just the price goes way up and the structural value goes down.
Right.
What we usually work out with a lot of people, if they have this scenario and they go through, usually do like decorative boxing if they care about the looks, which adds cost, but that's one of the few options.
Now you put the plug in for Trex or something.
Yeah,
Are they around
in
here?
here too?
I don't know.
Basically, I'm redoing my deck next year, so I'm trying to get hooked up.
Yeah. I mean,
well,
I'm faced with that a lot. They don't want the pressure treated look on their deck posts. And,
so an option,
you can sandwich it in between pieces of trim, and that just means that that's gonna wear out even quicker.
yeah, I mean, what they can do too, again, this just adds cost, is if they have a 2nd-story deck, they just get a waterproofing membrane they put up there like they do for decks, so it's a waterproof 2nd floor. One, you can market it as, basically you have a usable area all year round on the first deck,
Right.
and you don't have to do pressure treated because it's considered under the drip line. It's approved, essentially waterproofing and roofing and assembly, right? So that's always an option. It's just, those are expensive. That's actually, I have a double decker deck at my house, and that's what I'm gonna do, is put a material up there because I want that look, plus be able to use it year round.
Yeah. That's okay if they wanna spend the extra money to
Yeah.
waterproof that. Well,
Yeah,
that's an issue because I run across that a lot where that post is just ugly. Thank God it's changed to brown and not the green pressure treated stuff anymore.
yeah.
That's helped out, but it still is not very attractive.
Yeah, I
As
mean,
far as rail, not to mention slivers and,
Rub.
yeah, it's all of that above. So if you took a piece of Doug fir and it was primed and painted, it's no different than T111 siding on a house. It's protected as well as any other exposed Doug fir.
that's the number one complaint we get is looks.
Yeah.
Out of everything. And so we got to try to offer alternatives, but again, sort of is what it is. At times, that's what the code requires.
Did you say that guard posts say conventional one floor deck? Is guard post supposed to be pressure treated also, or just
So,
girders,
yeah.
joists, and posts?
So everything's structural, even the guard posts.
Guard posts are supposed to be.
So what we're seeing more of is people using cedar redwood posts for guard posts. More so if it's not part of the one that runs all the way through. I think I talked about everything related to that. So no site plan if the deck is new or there's an addition to a deck. So for deck replacements that are like for like, even though I hate the like for like word, we don't require any site plans as part of your plan submittal. So for like this one, this is all we would require is your plan. It's essentially 1 or 2 sheet plan with some details and you're done. If you're replacing this and you're adding a deck out here because you want to put in a jacuzzi tub or something like that, real common, or you want to put a little stairway out here that was never there before, we need a site plan because we need to know where septic and leach fields are at, we need to know setbacks and all the other stuff that is affected outside that. No ledger details or notes, so they just don't have any detail whatsoever, so we need to know how that ledger is attached, flashing, things like that. So just not having that. No post braces shown, mentioned that earlier, and overspan members conventionally, or even on engineering analysis, the structural calculations will say, you know, I'm analyzing this 2x8 for a max span, 9.5 feet, and they calc it out that way, it actually is like 10 feet. Or they use a different, on the plan, they show number 2 material, structural calc show number 1. So a lot of these are redlineable, I guess you could say, but it's something we see pretty often. So common construction things that we see out in the field, sort of what John mentioned is existing footings don't meet minimum. So we'll have, they'll meet with Rodney or Monty at the front, or front counter, do the plan review at the front counter, and the guys up front will ask, well, what are your footings? Well, they're 12 by 12 or 18 by 18, what is required by code, and we're like, okay, we'll redline those sizes on there, inspect it to verify at time of first inspection. They go out, ask you to dig one up, I will tell you 99% of the time, the footings look like this. It's a backhoe or something at one point in time, dug a hole like that with a bowl, they plopped a precast base on it and called it done. These are about 6 to 8 inches deep and just kind of waffle out. This is how they build decks forever. So just keep in mind when you're pricing stuff out, when you're doing your investigation for replacing the deck, just plan on pouring new footings. And even if they might even have to be bigger now, they might have to be 24 by 24 instead of 12 by 12 as they used to be. So never assume in regards to this, because the inspectors will look at this every single time they come up at their first inspection for a deck. Lateral devices not installed or not embedded into framing. So a lot of times they're just not there because a lot of people it's still new to them. That you need to have these mechanical devices connected to the existing structure, especially a lot of homeowners. We deal with that a lot. Or like DT1Zs, for example, you have this connection here and you embed these into the top plate, right? Well, depending on, sometimes these are offset a little bit for whatever reason, or they drive them in not flush, like parallel with this. They drive them up through the rim board, so when the inspector goes in there and looks in the underfloor, he sees all these shiners in there. That doesn't do you any good because you don't get any value of just hanging out in free space. So a lot of times you'll see that. Handrails. I will say probably since the history of building code existed, probably the number one thing that is written up by the building inspectors write for anything is handrails and stair related requirements. It's been that way forever. Those requirements really haven't changed much over the years, but it is something that is really tough to deal with. One on the heights, the sizes, terminations, things like that. So sizes, one, this is on our deck guide, and these are all the different sizes and they're measured differently. You have type 1 and type 2 handrails, you have non-circular, circular. So it is kind of complicated. So if you want to use something out of the ordinary other than like a round handrail, look at our deck guide or ask us, because you don't want to do a decorative metal railing that's really cool that has a weird angle that you weld all together and then you gotta rip it out. Return. A lot of times they'll just have it here instead of coming down, they'll just poke out to the end here and not return it. The code requires it to be returned to the post on the top and bottom. So basically kind of looks like this, or there's a fortress railing out there that a lot of people use that has, it's like a prefab that it returns, but it doesn't return all the way back to the post. It basically so if the post was like right here, it would go down and returns like 6 inches from the post. Basically has like a 6 to 8 inch bend around. We accept that. We consider that as a return. It meets the intent for somebody going down and returning back around the line. So if you're using Fortress, which a lot of people do, we do accept that one. Using flat mushroom cap on top of a 2x6 or 2x4. So they'll just install a mushroom cap railing on top of this that does not meet handrail requirements. You can't grab it. We see that still a lot. A lot of homeowners try to do that. Just try to stay away from that. Attachments not through spacers. So can I conventionally use deck ledger spacers? When I say it's spacers, it's basically these suckers right here, right? They have a bunch of different types, but they're spacers that space a ledger out from the building. Can I use those conventionally?
What do you mean conventionally?
Like conventionally designed a deck, non-engineered, can you use it?
I think it's in the tech code they explain it.
Yeah, we allow it because based on installation instructions and manufacturer specs. So you can design it this way conventionally. The problem being is when we see these installed, sometimes they'll put these spacers on this because like this type, they're not all this way. They screw them in from the backside so they stay in place and then they can put it up. Some of them don't, they just are free floating and you put the bolts through them.
Fall out later.
Yeah, but some of the intent is the lags go through these holes. They don't just space it out. We see it a lot to where they'll put just a bunch of these spacers up there and then they'll just throw the lags in wherever. These are listed for the lags to go through the holes. We see that a lot. You'd be shocked. And usually when they do that, the ledger board goes like this because they're not through the actual, where the spacer's at. When I use these spacers, do I have to flash? Do I have to flash up against the house?
Yes.
No, yeah,
You can, not code doesn't. With flashing,
you mean
code is
going
very,
down and over the ledger.
yes.
Right.
So flashing, like normally typically you would,
It's made where the water can go in between.
yeah, typically you would put flashing
Right there.
like that, right?
Yeah.
With the spacer, you have, half-inch gap or something like that right here, right? So do you have to do that flashing up against there?
No.
No, that's why a lot of people use them, like stucco balcony replacements, like they do that a lot in the valley. They intentionally do this because they don't want to cut into stucco, install flashing, and do all that. It's a nightmare. So no, you don't have to do it, you can. You do have to seal all the penetrations off. It's kind of obvious. Non-pressure treated materials used. So we talk about those, they may have all pressure treated underneath, but they have all these structural deck guardrail posts. They don't make them pressure treated. So just make sure anything structural, when in doubt, needs to be pressure treated if it's exposed to blood. Yeah.
Question, so you're saying that those deck posts and those stair posts aren't structural?
So no, what I'm saying is these are, because those are structural for your guard. Yeah. Not for holding up your deck, but it's structural for your guard. Because they have to withstand a certain load.
So either pressure treated or redwood cedar or whatever.
Yeah, or the prefab, like Fortress sells those prefab posts and all the other stuff too. Inconsistent stair risers, again, it's just stairs. If you haven't ever framed stairs before, it's like your worst nightmare to me. I hate it. I've done it enough to know I don't like it. Whenever I see somebody that does like a custom framed winder stair and everything's perfect, I'm like you're a god, but there's a lot of variables. A lot of people don't measure out where their deck lands for the vertical distance. They'll measure this, or they don't account for their sleeper or whatever else, and it throws all that off. So most commonly it's the bottom or top one that is off more than 3/8 of an inch, because all the code allows is 3/8 of an inch. It's not much.
different floor covering on the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, it may be good, like even interior stairways may be good at rough frame, but they may have a different floor material on the first floor than they have on the second, that throws everything off. Again, that is, as an inspector, that's a tough call to make, you know, when you're saying, hey, you gotta rip your whole stairway out. Hopefully you can make it up at the top and bottom somewhere, shape or form, if you run into that. Landings, again, they don't, maybe they have a landing, but it's not long enough. It's like 2 foot in depth instead of 3 feet. You require a landing 3 feet in depth on the top and bottom of every residential stairway, essentially.
What's it have to be made out of for like deck? Does it have to be concrete? It could be like DG?
We say weather resistant materials, so basically pavers, asphalt, concrete, anything like that. We don't allow gravel or dirt, essentially. Everything else we pretty much allow. We have allowed compacted DG before, like you see on a lot of like a park paths, things like that. They're 4 inches of compacted, and it's almost like concrete at that point. Yeah. So what is affected by deck area of alteration? So if John mentioned this earlier, if I'm replacing 3 deck joists here, what does that affect? From our enforcement standpoint, what are we gonna be asking you to do and analyze? So I'm replacing 3 deck joists. Obviously the deck joists have to meet all the spans and material requirements and all that stuff. But what about these girders? What about these posts? What about the footings? What about blocking? What about the ledger? What do you guys think?
If we were gonna replace 3 joists on a dry rotted deck, we're replacing the 3 joists in the same size. We can't change that, increase it by snow load. We can't change any of that stuff.